I'm Mike.
I'm Jason.
Welcome to Snake Envy. So, we might dip into a little controversy with this topic. I've complained to you frequently as a hobbyist that one of the things that annoys me a little bit about the hobby right now is I don't feel like we let beginners ease into things. I feel like, they've got to spend way too much on their setup and on their husbandry and on their animals, and everybody is bombarding them with everything under the sun because social media and the internet, it's kind of natural that everybody who knows a lot more than the beginner jumps in and says, oh, well, you got to have this, you got to have this, got to have that. Do you kind of feel the same way based on conversations you hear from people in the hobby or from customers?
I do. I hear about it.
I'll give you one example. Would be just an example of something concrete would be UV light. Um, Neither of us use UV light in our enclosures. My snakes do go outside when the weather's nice, and they do get some exposure to UV that way. UV is still, I think, fair to say, a little controversial. Not everybody uses it. Even experts don't all use it. But a poor beginner goes onto a social media group. They want to show off their first snake. They want to show off their enclosure. And they get bombarded with, where's your UV light? And you're talking about added expense. You're talking about added complication. It's also one of those things that if you get the strength of the light wrong, you get the height of the light wrong, you can actually do more harm than good. Would it be too much to just let a beginner kind of ease into things and feel confident about their keeping and feel confident about the fact that their snake's been eating for a year, and then at their own pace, kind of let them learn about other
Right.
things they want to do? Can you think of another example?
Cage size is one, but a snake can grow into an enclosure.
Yes,
So,
I agree. Yeah. And I used to do what everybody else does. You start them in a tub or you start them in a really small enclosure, and then you change enclosure sizes about 3 times throughout their life. I don't do that anymore. I set up my enclosures so they can, only live in one small part of it if they choose, but if they want, they can go explore the whole thing. And so I'm down to one enclosure for a snake's life.
yeah, I think it's fine. I set up a friend that way. This bull snake is going to live its whole life in this thing, and
Yes.
it's totally fine.
Nothing wrong with that at all. So, what about the choice of snakes? What's your opinion on that?
Pros and cons.
Well, over the last few years, there's one snake that has kind of become the go-to for beginners, and I don't think it's a beginner snake. How about you?
Ball pythons, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. I have never owned a ball python. I don't ever plan on it. I only keep stuff I like. That's I don't do it on like this is a moneymaker or any of this type of thing. But the biggest complaint I hear is it won't eat.
Right.
They go off feed, off and on, and that's that's stressful as a beginner hobbyist.
You and I have talked about that in prior videos. A snake is probably the first pet that a beginner's owned that doesn't eat every single day and doesn't eat regularly, and that's a change. And then on top of that, if you happen to end up with a snake that goes on long fasts, it's really, really stressful. And all cards on the table, neither of us have ever kept ball pythons, neither of us have been interested in them, but so it's kind of an outside looking in perspective, but sometimes that's good. We're also not fanboys who are not objective either. So maybe the opinion we're offering is worth it for some folks, but I think it's unfortunate that particular snake has kind of become the de facto go-to snake for beginners. I think there are much better options. So you mentioned fasting. What's another couple reasons that balls can be challenging for beginners?
I mean, one thing it might not be a challenge is holding the things because they just ball up on you. But if you want a snake, you want to see action, that's probably not a snake you're going to see a lot of action out of. A display cage, it's just going to sit there a lot of the time or hide, and colubrids hide too.
Not nearly as much typically.
They'll come out and play though.
I actually don't think most people are keeping ball pythons the way they should be kept. They're burrowers in the wild, and I don't see a ton of people keeping them on deep substrate. They probably. I wonder if they would be more active if they could tunnel and if they actually had the kind of environment they have in the wild. But let's talk about heat pits. Now I have a green tree python, and I think I've told you before. When he was young, it was all about the heat pits. When he ate, all his meals needed to be warm, or he could care less. Eventually, the other senses kicked in, and he started to recognize them visually. He started to be able to recognize the smell. But for a while, when he was young, it was all about warm prey. For a beginner, it's hard to understand exactly the role of the heat pits. It's easy to have accidents at feeding time when you're feeding frozen thawed and your hand is considerably warmer than that room temperature prey that you're trying to feed it. The other thing is pythons have considerably longer teeth than colubrids on the whole. And it's not that any snake bite is all that bad, but it's certainly going to be more dramatic than, say, from a corn snake.
Yeah, if you're getting bit by a corn snake versus a python, for your first bite, it's going to be a big deal.
So it can be a little scary. And then, fasting, any snake can fast. Any snake can take breaks. Any snake can take a seasonal break. But with ball pythons, it's not unheard of for them to literally go off feed for months. And so for the beginner, it's not your typical type of fast. They can be very long and very, very, very frustrating. Personally, I've known several people that have had kind of their snake experience ruined by a ball python, either by the bite, and truthfully, ball pythons have great temperaments. I am not knocking them as a snake at all. I just think they're better for more experienced keepers. But when you're a beginner and have a serious bite or two, it can ruin your experience. And then if you add fasting on top of that, I just know too many people who have kind of come to the hobby expecting a lot of fun, expecting great things, and then a ball python was kind of a downer, and they never came back. And I think that's unfortunate. So why don't you kick us off with your first alternative? Because we're going to recommend 3 beginner snakes that we think would get people off to a better start. What's number 1 on the list?
Corn snakes.
I agree. Corn snakes, tried and true. For many, 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 many years, they were kind of the go-to beginner snake. I'm not sure why.
I still don't think anything's changed.
I still think they're incredibly popular, but it is very rare today that when I'm talking to a beginner, they aren't talking about ball pythons being their first snake. But let's talk about corn. So this is our first alternative to ball pythons, tried and true. What's the number 1 advantage?
This temperament right here.
Yeah.
I could chill in front of the TV if I wanted, or go on a walk through the neighborhood as long as it's not uncomfortably hot or cold. But the temperament of this snake is why I think they're ideal. And then feeding, these guys eat all the time. They always want to eat.
Yes. And for people who aren't familiar with them in the wild, They'll eat varied diets. In the wild, these guys are eating mammals, they're eating birds, they're eating eggs. It's very easy not just to get them eating, but also to feed them a varied diet and give them good variety. They're a great snake. What about variability as a breeder? I'm glad that you chose this one because this isn't typically, in terms of pattern, what people are thinking of when they think of a corn.
Correct. This is a tessera, which gives it the striping. But I mean, these are normal colors of a corn, gray and this brick red kind of look. But that's what makes corn so amazing. I mean, pick a color and you can have pretty much,
Yeah, before ball pythons came along, these guys were arguably the snake that had the most morphs, most choices, and they're still right up there. What about their activity levels in a display enclosure? Most pet owners, myself included, hobbyists, most of us are keeping snakes in display enclosures. These, unlike ball pythons, kind of the opposite, right, in terms of activity?
Correct. Yeah, like this would be great if you had one snake and you had an aquarium or any kind of a display setup, and this snake will be active in the daytime. You can watch it crawl around, climb in trees, just cruise around. They're active. They're gonna go hunt for the day.
Yeah.
Where like ball pythons are almost waiting for prey to come to them.
More of an ambush predator in the wild, definitely. Pythons in general are more of an ambush, whereas these guys, along with king snakes and some others, they're out actively hunting and actively looking for food, and that carries over to their captive behavior. Let's move on to the next option that we're going to talk about, which is one that you're well known for. And what would that be?
Gopher snakes, I think, are a great beginner snake.
Well, yeah, once again, I agree. Gopher snakes, highly underrated in my opinion. I think gopher snakes should be more popular in the hobby. So tell me what we're looking at here.
This is a Sonoran gopher snake.
And these are found throughout the Southwest.
Yeah, these go into West Texas.
Yeah.
Into the Big Bend area.
Now, compared to corns, they can get quite a bit bigger, but as you were saying, this is actually a specimen that's on the kind of the large end of the range for these guys.
There's San Diego's and there's Sonoran, or San Diego's, Pacific's, Great Basins. They're all similar to corn snakes in size. Maybe a little bit girthier, but lengthwise, very similar.
Yeah, of the three snakes we're going to talk about, gophers have the potential to be the largest. Variability, probably not quite on par with corns, but there's a lot to choose from. What's special about this one? Obviously hypo.
This is, well, they look hypo, but this is a natural.
Oh, really?
This is natural colors. You get these chocolates and yellows in here. This is actually a snake a friend of mine created. He bred a Christmas Mountain locality from West Texas to a meeker, which is an aberrancy gene. And the idea for this thing is to make the meekers tend to get kind of dirty, brownish colors to them, and this Christmas Mountain locality, they're very vibrant, and so trying to create an aberrancy with bright yellows. And so the babies should really be way better than her.
The amazing thing about gophers that the cameras just don't do justice is the variation on each scale. There are individual scales that look like a piece of granite, and they're just gorgeous, particularly when you get them outside in the sun. They just light up. But similar to what we were talking about with corn snakes, the advantages of gopher snakes over ball pythons, let's run through those real quick. It's very similar. Let's start with temperament. Now, you can already see a little higher activity level than with the corn. Now, to be fair, your snakes don't get handled a ton. These are breeders, and they're not getting handled 3 times a week like a hobbyist or a pet owner is going to do. So you have to temper expectations just a little bit based on the fact that they're not handled a ton, but still doing very well.
it's a big, strong animal, and
Yes.
you could probably feel the strength in it. But in saying that, it can handle being handled fairly,
Yes.
regularly. With not,
They're
not delicate.
They're not delicate.
No, they're strong.
Very strong eaters.
Yep, they want to eat every week.
Yes. In my experience with this entire genus, gophers, bulls, and pines, they will absolutely eat varied diets, which I love. They're not picky at all. So I'm feeding them poultry. I'm feeding them both mice and rats. And I'm working on eggs. And I'm pretty confident they're going to take those as well.
Yeah.
Activity in a display enclosure, these guys are amazing. They do tunnel. I keep them on deep substrate, but I love seeing the tunnel openings. I love seeing them periscoped out of the substrate, particularly in the mornings.
Yeah, and
that's behavior.
And gopher
that I
snakes,
love.
they will be active day or night.
Yeah, but in a display enclosure, they're perfect.
Yeah.
One thing that we have to talk about a little bit with these guys, when they're young, they're known for their defensive displays. They will rise up, they'll coil, and they'll raise their head, they'll open their mouth. You might be able to pick it up on camera, even when they're just breathing normally. Like if you can hear that right now, sometimes you can hear the exhale. It is part of their personality. You can also see just in their eyes and their inquisitiveness, they're so unique compared to so many of the snakes in the pet trade. They're very inquisitive, very intelligent.
And very good personalities. I mean,
yes,
great I got a few grumpy ones too, but a couple grumpies give them a bad rep. And because they're really just, most of them are just sweetie.
King snakes are similar.
Birds, man.
But it is important for beginners to know that when they're young, you're going to get some of that defensive display. You're going to get some of that bluff. It is bluff. It's very rare that they bite. And a bite from a young gopher snake is going to be much preferable to a ball python. And it's actually, in my opinion, going to be rarer because you take away the heat pitch, you take away the likelihood of accidents. So if a gopher bites you, it's being defensive and it wants to bite you, whereas ball pythons are a little more likely to make a mistake at feeding time.
The one thing about gophers and bulls is they rarely will just turn and bite. It's almost always a strike.
Yes.
So they don't just turn and start chewing on you it's pretty rare.
No. And that defensive display, they typically outgrow that fairly quickly. I always tell beginners with this species, you want to reach in, you want to grab it confidently, you don't want to hesitate, you don't want to give it a chance to show off. And if you do that, generally as soon as you pick them up, they're good to go.
Yeah, we'll have to have an episode on that, how to break them.
Yes.
Of that,
just handling any snake, but particularly for snakes that are kind of known for their defensive displays. For a beginner, it can absolutely be intimidating.
Well, yeah, this is a rattlesnake mimic. Look at these diamondbacks. It looks like it's supposed to be mimic a rattlesnake pattern.
Now, of the three snakes we're going to talk about as ball python alternatives, these can definitely get the largest of the three. And this, again, is on the big end of the spectrum. By the time 2 to 3 years has gone by and a snake starts to approach this size, and actually for a gopher it's probably going to be longer. Some bulls can get this big in 2 or 3 years. You're not going to be a beginner anymore. And you're going to be used to the personality of your snake. So imagine how cool to have a snake this size when you've had it for about 3 years plus, and you know its personality, you know what to expect. Having a snake this size, that's this beautiful, and that has this much personality and activity, can't beat it.
I mean, look at this big beefy tail.
Yeah, can't beat it. So we definitely highly recommend gopher snakes. What's the third snake we're going to talk about?
King snakes in general, but we're going to actually talk about one in particular. But
we're going to throw you a curveball. Probably not a snake when you hear king snake that you're thinking about, but we're going to make the case maybe you should. We've got two beautiful examples of our curveball. Obviously, two very different ages.
Yeah.
So I actually acquired this one from Jason about 8 weeks ago. So tell us what we're looking at here in terms of localities. These are Alterna, which is the gray-banded king. What localities do we have here?
This one here is Highway 277. And they are an Alterna phase typically. They're highly variable. Like with gray bands, you don't need color morphs because you get all these variations just naturally.
And this one is a Juno Road. Both are found in West Texas. And yes, in terms of the variability, she's mostly orange. This one is mostly gray. This one is striped. This one is banded. And those are just natural variations. And we have others in this room. I mean, there's probably, 5 different variations sitting here right now?
There's a bunch.
A few of them have very little orange at all.
Or no.
Or none. Yeah, just gray and black primarily. They're amazing. They're beautiful. They're unique in terms of their appearance. Their head shape doesn't look king snake at all. They have those big bug eyes like a racer.
Nope, nocturnal. That's why.
Yep, nocturnal primarily in the wild. Now, we are recommending this as a beginner snake. Why?
Not as a hatchling per se, but once you get these snakes established and eating
they're like
weekly,
any other king.
like they're just like any other king.
Yeah.
And this is an adult female. This has laid eggs last year, and so this is a relatively small snake.
Yeah, they're one of the smaller king snake species. There's a couple that are smaller, but even smaller than corns. Definitely smaller than the gopher snakes we were talking about. But sometimes for beginners, that's exactly what you want. You want a snake that you can kind of ease into the hobby with. This is going to save you money in terms of enclosure size. This is going to save you money in terms of food. Both of which are advantages when you're just getting started. Now, I got this from you about 8 weeks ago, but tell everybody how long it takes to get these eating prior to being able to sell them.
Every year, it takes me about 6 months to get these guys to where they're at a stage where I want to sell them. I feel comfortable at selling, usually January or so, these will usually hit the market. I'll put them on the market. They're typically lizard eaters in the wild, and so it takes a little while for them to get switched over, and it's a long process. Some of them go right away, but the majority of them, you'll be 3-4 months. And sometimes they don't eat for 5 months or longer before they take their first meal. It's just, they're all different. One reason I want to say this is a good beginner snake is because their temperament is just, the gray bands don't bite very often.
No.
I mean, I've had a few biteys, but I haven't. But they're generally just
their temperament's
very
amazing.
docile.
I agree completely. And you were mentioning before when we were talking about gopher snakes, it only takes 1 or 2 bad experiences for kind of the whole species to get branded as vicious. And with king snakes, of course, primarily because of the California king, they've kind of developed a reputation for being bitey. And that has more to do with food response than defensive bites. But with Alterna, that's not an issue. The temperament of these guys is phenomenal. Absolutely amazing. We mentioned the variability. We mentioned the size. We talked about their temperament. You really can't go wrong with this snake as long as you buy it from a reputable breeder that has taken the time and the effort to get them eating. As long as you buy an established snake, it's like every other king snake. It's going to eat and eat and eat and never give you any problems. So You really can't go wrong with this one. I think they're underrated. And when you think about king snakes, no one would argue that king snakes are good beginner snakes, but no one's thinking about this particular subspecies. And I would argue you should. They're amazing.
I started out with the gray band when I got back from my childhood. When I wasn't an adult, I got one of the first snakes I bought was a gray band,
Yeah.
and it did give me a little bit of trouble here and there, but it was not established.
Yep, that's the key. It's definitely, but there's plenty of snakes like that in the hobby. Hognose snakes are one of the more popular ones right now. They're very similar. They need to be established before you buy them. These guys are no different. Please like and subscribe. We look forward to comments. We're hoping we can do some episodes here soon where we're just answering your questions. So please let us know if you have any questions, particularly about Alterna. I think of all the snakes we've talked about, this is probably the one that maybe people are the least familiar with. Thank you.
Thanks.